This is What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
I'm Evan Mintz.
I'm Chris Bell.
I'm James Campbell.
Evan's in for Andy, who's out of town today. Thanks for joining us, Evan. What's left?
My pleasure.
What's Left America is coming to you from our home at Dean's Downtown in beautiful downtown Houston, Texas. What's Left America is proudly produced by Left Out Media and brought to you by the generosity of our sponsors and friends, if we ever happen to find one again, and hopefully someday friends just like you. Before we start the show, just want to note that, Chris, we've been talking, and ever since we moved to our beautiful home here at Dean's Downtown, you've gotten an awful lot like Andy in your on-time arrival.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, I'm just taking it a little easier now that we're not taping at my office.
A little easier?
Well, yeah.
Some people call that late.
Well, I don't think I was actually late.
I was late, and if I knew we were recording at a bar, I definitely would have been here early. I went to the old location, which is a law office.
That's right. And you're always late to law offices.
Yeah.
Today on the show, we're going to cover the art of the cave. Was it a tweet? And we're going to end the show with lightning round. Well, the next topic is lightning round in the show, as always, with Out of Left Field. Let's get right into the show. The art of the cave. Let's just review a little bit. Trump agrees to fund the government without funding the Trump wall. Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh call him a pussy for not getting funding for his wall before the Republicans lose control of the House. He reverses course and announces that he will not sign the continuing resolution unless there's $5.7 billion to build his wall. He couldn't get that through the Senate, so he shut the government down, taking credit for shutting the government down. For 34 days, 800,000 federal workers go without pay. Trump's poll numbers go down. They tank. Nancy Pelosi schools him in how government works. and I mean, she schooled him in big league government, and he agrees to reopen the government without getting anything he demanded for the wall. I think that pretty much covers it.
And so if you look at what political scientist Matt Glassman says about Trump, he repeatedly backs down on his public stances on stuff, and he caved again on this issue. But what he did was run into a very formidable foe in Nancy Pelosi, an emboldened Democratic Party who are willing to stand up to Trump. And I think that this shows that he is vulnerable on several fronts, particularly these false narratives that he creates about immigration or any other thing that he talks about. And so I think what you have is a real leadership against Trump now, and he's not used to that.
Well, and also I think this is the first time that he's going to face some kind of sacrifice with his base because of what you said regarding Ann Coulter, who's probably been the most despicable creature throughout this entire ordeal. But they listen to her. A lot of those folks listen to her, and I don't know where Limbaugh is, but I'm sure he's singing probably from that same hymn book. And, it really goes back to what we said weeks ago on the show. It's funny that he fashions himself such a fantastic negotiator and deal maker, but then he immediately paints himself into a corner when the Democrats had really no motivation whatsoever.
There's been this idea from the election that Donald Trump is some kind of magical figure who transcends politics and isn't bound by the same gravity as everyone else. And a lot of Democrats seem to believe that propaganda. But you have Nancy Pelosi there who looked at him and realized he's bound to the same stuff as everyone else, held her ground, treated him just like another politician, and he failed. And there seems to be a big crisis here in that Republicans, and specifically Donald Trump, are willing to do anything to get the wall. They really want that wall. And I don't believe it, because if you really want something, you're willing to pay a lot for it. You're willing to offer a lot for it. And what is Trump willing to offer for the wall? He's willing to offer, say, legal status for the 10 million undocumented immigrants? No, not that. Is he willing to kind of go at it at an angle and say, hey, Democrats, give me the wall and I'll give you a $15 minimum wage? No, he's not willing to do that. The fact is that Trump doesn't really want the wall. He wants to say he wants the wall and he wants to fight over the wall, but willing to do what it takes to build the wall? Not really.
But didn't you think it was interesting that, so he makes an offer that's really not an offer, but I think he thought that he had put enough out there that they could flip it and
Right.
say that it was the Democrats who were being so stubborn and unreasonable. And I don't think anyone in the country bought into that.
Well, Evan's exactly right. He just offered things that he had already taken away. He said, I'll give you things I took away back. But that was no offer at all. And Nancy Pelosi was smart enough to realize, A, your poll numbers are dropping. Mine are right. The Democrats are rising. And so we'll just sit back and watch you sweat. And that's exactly what happened.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, it's like we were talking about, one of my predictions at the end of the year was before the end of January, it would be the Republicans who caved, because as that second paycheck came to it, and there were 800,000 people were not going to get their second paycheck. It was the Republicans who went to him and said, "We're bailing, and you better do something."
Well, I agree with that. It was about the paychecks, but it was about the messaging that the Democrats had. They won the messaging war, but it was also about the economy slowing down. It was also about 800,000 people not contributing to this economy. It's about airports. It's about national parks. There were a lot of things that contributed to this, but I think the thing that really doomed Trump was members of the Republican Party moving towards the Democratic position more so, and Mitch McConnell's total absence of leadership.
Evan, was Nancy Pelosi right to take the position, we will not negotiate with you while the government is closed?
Well, you don't want to create a moral hazard and say that you're going to negotiate with a gun to your head. And I think if you look at every government shutdown dating back to 94, the team that's willing to say, let's just have a clean bill and move forward, is the one that everyone agrees with, the one that gets popular support. And again, we saw that it was astounding that when the bills finally came to the floor in the Senate, the Democratic bill got more votes than the Republican one in a Republican-controlled Senate. But I also think that James, you were getting at something important, that if you take a step back from the sort of football mentality of this side against that side of politics, some of the real powerful forces were the workers who weren't showing up to work,
right,
were the people who work for airlines, airline security, and all sorts of federal agencies who just were going through a slow motion general strike where they're saying, we're not going to show up to work without pay. Is that what you demand of us? And I think it was almost astounding in a depressing way that didn't happen sooner, that people were being asked to go to work without pay. You look at any other developed country, you have people protesting in the streets over that. How beaten down are American workers where you're asked to go to work without pay and you go, yes, sir, of course.
Well,
I
and the
think that
blinders.
I think that turned it in the end, though, because in the end it really was about the people. And in the other shutdowns, I'm sure some folks have been inconvenienced, but not to this level.
Well, the
and not
blinders,
the kinds of stories that were coming out.
And you take the stories of the workers that are losing everything, and then you juxtapose that with the blinders of the president and Wilbur Ross and the statements they were making. Wilbur Ross.
Is that a perfect name for a damn fool?
Well, and just
I
saying,
thought Saturday Night Live had created a character.
Well, and for him to say, for Wilbur Ross to say, just go to the bank and they'll loan you the money. That's easy when you're a billionaire. And for President Trump to say, that's not what he meant. You just go to the grocery store that you go to all the time, and they'll just give you the food.
That was my
they
favorite.
have blinders on.
Big picture, when you have government run by the exceedingly wealthy, there's a total detachment between what life is like for most Americans.
Right.
And when you start to see, and I'm sure we're going to keep talking about this, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about attacks on the wealthy, like there is some policy output and making sure that you don't have a bunch of billionaires running around setting policy for everyone else.
Who has no idea how the rest of the world lives.
Absolutely.
But usually, even when you're a billionaire in politics, you try to hide it a little bit. I mean, to
You wear tennis shoes every now and then.
Well, yeah, or maybe have some idea. And it was just extraordinary to hear some of the comments that were being made.
I don't know. Do you ever see Michael Dell at the HEB anymore?
So what happens?
I've never run into Tillman Fertitta at Whole Foods or even HEB or Kroger's. I don't even see these guys out there.
But you have
people
seen
pick
his
up
personal
curbside
shopper.
I've
You've
seen
seen his
Tillman at
personal
the
shopper. You
movies
just
even.
didn't know it.
Tillman doesn't even buy to have the whole movies brought to his home. I've seen him at the theater.
All right, so
before,
let's
that's
just,
not-
before we run out of time, what happens now? There's 19 days left to work this out, or the president claims he's going to close the government again. Now, first, the president is not closing the government again. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not happening.
Okay, so you got a couple of scenarios here. So immigration advocates are basically saying that the Democrats should not cave into a false narrative about immigration. MS-13 like taking over the streets in West U.
Well, nobody's buying that anyway.
And rich neighborhoods, yeah. But that's the narrative that Trump is starting to tweet again. He's talking about Central Americans coming up and walking into the country. What needs to happen is the Democrats need to stick to their guns on funding for more immigration judges, so these people who are fleeing genuine economic oppression and threats to their lives, figure out how to get these people into the country without Republicans saying that these people are terrorists. Two, I think they need to figure out to get beyond this whole smart wall concept into talking about how you're going to protect the border without a physical structure. And so they're talking about technology, things that can detect people coming into the country. They need to really harden the entrances where people are getting into. They need to fix the visa issue. There are a lot of immigration issues that the Democrats can fix and work on, but giving him a physical wall, I think, would be a mistake.
I even think that talking about a smart wall, or whatever you want to call it, shows that Democrats have given in too much. If you look at the statistics of undocumented border crossings, they're at decade lows.
Right.
And we're talking about this as if there's still a problem down there. I'd really like to see Democrats saying the whole thing is BS. We shouldn't be spending any more money on border security. We should be spending money on more judges, on changing our immigration laws to let in more migrants, to let in more workers. But even at that point, Democrats still seem a bit cowed.
Well, I don't think even Democrats have ever disagreed that you might need more security and more technology at the border and that kind of thing. But my advice to the Trump administration would be to remember this acronym, and that's STFU ATW, and that means shut the fuck up about the wall. And if you fencing has always been a part of what goes on the border, and I'm sure there's some areas where you can go in and it calls for increased fencing or something, but it's always going to have to be a comprehensive plan. And I think what most people find so offensive is this idea that you're going to build this giant wall between the United States and Mexico. As Evan just said, it's not necessary, and everybody realizes it's not necessary. And so, and even the folks who've really studied this on the Republican side know that that's not part of the solution.
But even for decades, before we had the 1986 immigration bill, you had workers going back and forth across the Rio Grande, as you had them do for decades.
And it
There are
worked.
migrant workers,
And it's
and
not
it
a
worked.
problem.
Nobody
And
cared.
And no one cared, because that's just how it was. Notice how in California, Republicans are terrified of Mexicans. In Texas, for the longest time, they're pretty chill with it, because that's just how the culture was here. And then you had the 86 immigration law that put in place some kind of amnesty. People who've been here in exchange for putting security on the border. And you had people who crossed every year suddenly realizing that the odds of getting arrested, odds of getting detained, having something bad happen to you, try to go back and forth, suddenly was increased. So they said, well, I might as well go and stay for a while. And when they stayed for a while, they realized that they liked it here, or they fell in love and got married, or they started a community or something. And so this usual way of doing things has totally been blown up.
But I think part of that evidence, the Republican narrative changed totally after 9/11, and now Republicans are saying you have like terrorists coming through.
That started with Trump. That started with Donald Trump.
That started before Donald Trump.
I never heard
You
anybody
need to
talk
pay
about
attention to
terror.
more Texas Tea Partiers.
Yeah,
Well, that's true.
It started
That's
before
true.
Donald Trump. And I think what's happening is that they're expanding that narrative to try to say that MS-13 gangs are controlling our communities. It's like, it's sort of like the neighborhoods that I grew up in. It's like MS-13 on MS-13 crime mostly. And so that's how that works. And to try to expand this is coming to River Oaks, to a River Oaks community near you, it's just BS.
So-
No, speaking of River Oaks, I grew up in a crime-ridden community too. So many people worked at Enron. I grew up with Elizabeth Holmes, big criminal there. Let's go for those guys.
So is it in
Build a
the
wall between Houston and River Oaks. Keep them out.
is it in the Democrats' best interest to play this out and force the president to try to declare a national emergency here?
How could he, with a straight face, declare a national emergency?
Well, there is no national emergency. We all agree with
We just went
that.
through this shutdown.
Yeah.
for all
And it
those
wasn't an
days.
emergency for the first 2 years of his presidency. I get that it's not an emergency.
No,
but if they force him into that, he gets out of this mess.
Then
the
he'll
court,
look like
it
a
goes,
bigger fool.
Well, you know,
Well,
Obama
that's-
tried
I
to
know,
pull
you're
something like
saying.
that too with DACA. He said for a long time that it was up to the legislature, not to him, to make all these changes. Then finally, after nothing happened forever, he did DACA and DAPA, and part of it got smacked down by the courts and part of it didn't. And you've got to wonder that if Trump tries to do something like this, maybe he'll get smacked down by the courts, maybe he won't. And maybe he just
But it's
crosses the
all-
Rubicon with executive power.
But it's
Yeah,
off his
and it was
back.
exactly-
It's off his back, and then the courts take it over, and he gets past his presidency. And I think that's what he's thinking in the back of his mind.
No. So to a large degree, yes. But as Evan pointed out, you know, Obama did this by executive fiat. It got beat down. Trump's people were on television today saying that he's going to. Mick Mulvaney said that he's going to do an.
They want him to
emergency
do
de-
it. It gives him that victory that his base
but
wants.
we know that this is going to get caught up in the courts. And, you know, if he does that, the Democrats, they give the Democrats something to campaign on.
There is a categorical difference, though, between prosecutorial discretion, which is what Obama tried to do, and just redirecting funds. I mean, if Congress has control over anything, it's money.
Money.
And if you're trying to take that away from them, you know, his original plan was to take money given to the executive for emergency recovery that was going to be spent, you know, on Hurricane Harvey recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you even had all the Texas Republicans coming together and say, we're not doing that.
And that means
Well, don't get
that-
me wrong.
and-
I think he loses if he does it.
Yeah.
But if he does it, it throws this whole wall thing into the courts. It's off his back. He says, I did what I said I would do to his base. So his base is happy with him. It's in the courts and it's off his back. I think he's going to do
But
it.
by the way, you know, any self-respecting person who listens to Ann Coulter or Russ Limbaugh on this,
That's an oxymoron.
yeah, that's just ridiculous.
But that'll be interesting too, because now she's turned on him. She's been the DACA enforcer primarily.
Yeah.
So now, since he acts like a little, you know, middle school kid anyway, does he say, oh, you know, my friend has turned on me and is out there saying these horrible things about me? So does that free him to now actually do what he seemed to want to do on DACA a long time ago?
I think you're overstating the influence that they have. If you read a lot of the sort of MAGA fans on the internet, which I think where a lot of the key support is, they say, well, I don't agree with this plan, but I trust Donald Trump 100%, and I think he's playing five-dimensional chess, and he's going to pull this off, and he's doing his proper scheming. He's a business genius. And you just look at this and be like, you know, the best metaphor I think I heard, everyone's like, well, you know, he's playing checkers, and Nancy Pelosi's playing chess. Like, no, it's the other way around. Nancy Pelosi's playing checkers. It's a very simple game
That's
that she's
exactly
good at.
right.
Donald Trump is playing chess, and that he's trying to pull off something very complicated, and he's dumb and not good
And
at
he's
it.
losing.
And he doesn't have all the best people around him. Remember, I'm going to have all the best people like Wilbur.
Yeah.
But Evan, how do you explain the timing on the back down on
'Cause
the
he was
when,
beat.
when
He
after
was-
Ann Coulter came out?
Because
He was losing the messaging
He was
war.
beat. The Republican senators came and said, we are bailing out if you don't get out of this
Yeah.
right now.
And also all the workers not showing up. It
Yeah.
just so happened that was the day when LaGuardia had to be shut down. He shut down a major airport,
In
and he
New
ran
York?
on
No,
a platform and saying
not
he's
the
gonna
timing
fix
on
it.
the shutdown ending, but before when he was trying to make a deal and
Oh,
she
that was
came
clear.
after him.
That was
I
clear.
mean,
He backed down because of
immediately-
her.
It wasn't just her, though. There is a rump
base
of
as
anti-immigration people in the House where they said that we don't want to vote on this, and forever it's been the tail wagging the dog on that they've let that rump of the Republican Party go forward. And if anything good comes out of this, I think there's an opportunity, if Democrats and Republicans really want to craft some kind of bill where it's all right, $5 billion for the wall in exchange for this small amount of immigration legalization probably for dreamers because everyone likes them, and the real hardcore anti-immigration people won't want it.
All right.
But if you can pass that and you break them off, you finally break their stranglehold, and that sets a path to the next deal, because it's like Republicans can breathe again. They know what it's like to pass a bill.
One last question on this topic, then we're going to move on.
Something that they
What-
don't know how to do.
What does this do to Trump's reelection campaign? He's been wounded by this. He admitted defeat, although he says he didn't, but this was a clear defeat. His aides are saying this is trouble for his reelection bid. What does this do to his
Well, if you
reelection?
thought he was surprised about being elected in 2016, this is so. This is, I'm kind of cynical about this, Chris. I think Americans have a very short-term memory. And I think that it depends, I would say it depends on who the Democratic nominee is. And if the Republicans really run somebody against Trump that's willing to tell the truth about him and really talk about his vulnerabilities.
I've said this before. I mean, I think this is what you call a really, really, really horrible week for the president of the United States. And I would agree with James that for the most part, people's memories are very short. Hell, we forget what Donald Trump did 2 weeks ago because he's done something so fucking stupid, this week, and that's been a real challenge. But this, no, I think this is the kind of thing, and the optics of this, and the federal workers having to go to food banks and all this. Those are the types of things people are never going to forget. Ask any, and like I said a few weeks ago, ask any air traffic controller if they, have forgotten about
Reagan
being laid off in 1981.
Right.
It's just not the kind of thing you forget about.
No, sometimes we get worked up on things that are at their core spectacle, and it's a media scandal. But this shutdown really affected people's, bottom line, affected their immediate material conditions. And that's something that, to his credit, Trump ran on. Are you doing better? How are your jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And for a lot of people, this is a sign that it's not going to get better.
And it's funny, Evan, because in the start, I think the media kind of played it from the standpoint of what we've seen with other shutdowns, where it goes on a little while, it's mostly theater and posturing, and then it ends, and everybody goes back on their merry way.
But remember,
then as it went on, then it got really
last
serious.
week, Crisco, I said that people were not going to choose their politics over paychecks, and it came down to paychecks.
I don't know. There are a lot of weird people out there, mostly get interviewed on Fox News, who say that they're willing to shoot themselves in the dick if Donald Trump would take them happy.
Yeah.
And those were women.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Was it a tweet? Was it a tweet is a game we play.
Well,
I'm going to read a tweet. You have to declare, was it a real Donald Trump tweet or did I make it up?
Okay.
All right. And Andy,
You're a
proxy for Andy.
You're a proxy for Andy, who is in the lead.
She's in the lead.
In the lead.
Okay.
She has 2 wins. Chris Bell has 1 win, and they have a tie each. So if you lose this, Andy's never going to forgive you.
Oh, man.
All right. Tweet number 1. Roger Stone worked for Roger Stone worked for Trump for a short time in 2015 and never worked for the campaign. No collusion.
Tweet.
Not a tweet. Fake.
Oh, shit.
All right, number 2. Even crazy Jim Acosta. God dang it, I can't read. Even crazy Jim Acosta of fake news CNN agrees. Trump World and World Houston sources. I can't read.
Can you get this straight?
I can't read.
Do we go forward with, was it a tweet? Do we retreat?
I'm just going to jump in and say not a tweet.
Even crazy Jim Acosta of fake news CNN agrees. Trump World and World Houston sources dancing in end zone. Trump wins again. Schumer and Dems caved, gambled, and lost. Thank you for your honesty, Jim.
Not a tweet.
Not a tweet.
Tweet.
Oh, yes.
Whoa.
All right. In the lead again.
Chris Bell.
In the lead again.
James Clapper and others started. Golly, Chris. James Clapper and others stated there was no evidence POTUS colluded with Russia. This story is fake news and everyone knows it.
Not a tweet.
Tweet.
Oh, okay.
All right, number 4.
I am behind. Chris is ahead.
The European Union is fake United States. It will never work.
Not a tweet.
Tweet.
Not a tweet.
Yeah.
All right.
Who said not a tweet? Evan? Okay. Evan and Chris are tied.
I just don't think that Trump knows enough about the European Union to speak about it.
All right, number 5. How much did Germany make tearing down the wall and taking over East Germany?
One more time.
Not a tweet.
How much did Germany make tearing down the wall and taking over East Germany?
Not a tweet.
Not a tweet.
Yeah, I'm on the board.
All right, that was it.
They're tied at 2 each. I have 1.
All right, so here's the tiebreaker. This is a long one. This is everything FDR dreamed about, the New Deal to put America back to work. Think of LBJ. He gave people food stamps and welfare. Donald Trump's giving them a job. He got a lot of good things to talk about. News stories do not accurately cover him. Should correct.
Tweet.
Not a tweet.
You're out, James.
Tweet.
Well,
2 weeks in a row.
Yes.
Chris Bell is now tied for the lead.
That actually with his tie, We'll have to look at the
I
standings
think
there.
I may have
No,
moved into
he
the.
goes.
Puts him a
into
half
the
a game,
league.
half a game ahead. Half a game ahead. Well,
Well,
you
this
gave it a good run, Evan. You
Oh.
gave it a good run.
First time.
Almost there. You eclipsed James Campbell, who's a veteran. So
You fell for the old Chris Tritico not being able to read trick.
I know. I should have been prepared.
An oldie but a goodie. All right.
I'm getting a phone call, which is messing up my timer here. That's terrible. All right, there we go. I'll have to call him back later. You know, I hate it when a policeman's calling me in the middle of a show.
Can we cut that part out,
I'll
perhaps? Okay.
I'll get back to you about that client. All right, here's the lightning round. This is something new we're going to do. We got several topics we're going to cover here in the time we have remaining. All right, the first topic, freshman representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in her 60 Minutes interviews earlier, I guess about a month ago, said the U.S. should raise taxes on income made by America's top earners. The idea is that once a person has made at least $10 million in a single year, every dollar coming in after that would be taxed at a rate of up to 70%. Many have dismissed the idea, saying it would be too radical and would damage the economy, but the Democratic representative from New York might have hit on something voters want. A new poll from the Hill and Harris X found that 59% of registered voters supported imposing a 70% tax rate on every dollar over the 10 millionth. What do y'all think?
I think that ever since the Democrats were waxed when George McGovern ran for president, they've been afraid to talk about taxes. And when Bill Clinton and the centrist Democrats pull the Democratic Party to the middle, almost to the right, they were afraid to really talk about taxes. Obama talked about it a little bit, but actually caved in and gave in to the Republicans. I think that the Democrats can now talk about taxes and be more progressive on this issue because now Republicans, and I think these are people who are low-income Republicans who think they are Republicans, can now talk about this because they have 45% of self-identified Republicans in this new poll, the Hill-Harris poll, saying that they agree that the marginal tax rate should be raised to 70% for all earned income at $10 million. And so I think that's an issue that should be debated. Now, Republicans are going to go to that tried and tested, campaign discussions about taxes.
Lightning round.
Okay. Yeah.
That was a long bolt.
Oh, I just think that on a show called What's Left America, there shouldn't even be a debate. Of course we should be raising taxes on the wealthy. Of course we should, for so many
70%?
reasons.
That's the issue, I think.
Absolutely. No, you don't need that much money. At a time we see people hoarding wealth, it's like a fat kid hoarding Twinkies while people starve. We have a declining declining maternal mortality rate in the state of Texas. Things are getting worse as the wealthier get richer. And it's not getting worse because there's a war or there's a disaster going on. It's we're not giving people money. We're not spending resources in the right way. Instead, we're letting NFL owners buy super yachts. I say, let's not raise taxes. Let's raise the guillotine. Let's chop some heads. Let's make them
They had a
afraid.
hedge fund guy just buy an apartment
Wait.
for $200 million.
What place is worth $250 million?
know.
How
go-
much good could you do with $250 million? Buying people health care,
So
buying
go
homes for the
24
homeless.
Hang on.
So go back.
Hang on.
You can go all the way back to Paul Krugman and the Conscience of a Liberal, and I think that was almost 20 years old now, and people have been talking about income inequality in the United States, but nobody's really put down, a very good plan to how are you going to address that without being extraordinarily intrusive. This is probably one of the less intrusive ideas that's been put out. You really, at some point, you do have to ask how much is enough. And when you have so much wealth concentrated in the top 1%, here in the United States, at some point you have to say, more of that money needs to be going into the government to support more of the programs that we have. And I disagree with James in that it wasn't that the Democrats weren't talking about taxes. Instead, they willingly accepted the moniker that the Republicans had put on them, the tax and spend, the tax and spend party. Well, that really wasn't true. And if you start talking about it in somewhat of a responsible fashion, I think people will.
That is absolutely not true, Chris. What Democrat at the top of the ticket has actually talked about, taxing 70%?
Obama talked about it an awful lot. Obama did a really good job of running on this populist platform of
Yeah,
taxing
but he
the
was
rich.
also the darling of Wall Street, too.
But this is the first time I've heard someone talk about, and maybe it's been out there, but taxing it after a certain point,
Right.
and that makes a lot of sense. And if somebody really wants to stand up and go, "Oh no, I mean, I cannot really make it if you tax me over my $10 million."
So let's talk about
Elizabeth Warren's got her wealth tax.
Well, that's what I'm
plan,
about to
too.
go to. But next was Elizabeth Warren came out with her tax plan, which is kind of Ocasio-Cortez light. Ultra millionaire tax plan would be 2% annually on net worth between $50 million and $1 billion, and 3% on anything above $1 billion. Economists say that Warren's plan would raise $2.75 trillion over 10 years. These plans are designed to attract progressives. Will they bring in the middle? And will they bring in those GOP voters that hate Trump?
It reminds me of living in Houston. You pay a property tax, right? You own a home, you got to pay an awful lot of money on that. Well, why not just pay it on everything else you own too? It seems to make a lot of sense.
Well, also, they're going to say, Democrats are going to raise your taxes. I mean, that's like the standard thing in every Republican commercial. If you can come back and say, no, we're not going to raise your taxes. We're going to raise the taxes on, the top 1% to 2% of earners in this country. You really have quite a shield, because I don't think most people in America really are going to feel too damn sorry for the top 1% or 2% having to pay a little bit.
And I think
more.
about Warren
even
Buffett.
if it's as high as
Yeah, but
I think about Warren Buffett, who for years has said,
Yeah.
I'm not taxed enough.
Yeah, but the problem is the Republicans
He's
are
responsible.
really good at messaging against taxes. The Democrats have to figure out a way to make it a slogan like,
Well, here they
"Build
are.
that tax."
Here they are right now.
I think what you got to do is you got to focus on the
But
fact
it's
that the
not a
economy
slogan.
is growing, and not for 40 years have workers seen a raise. It doesn't matter whether the economy suffers. You're still going to get paid the same amount.
Yeah.
I mean, it's time for people to confront that. When you talk to people who aren't making the multi-millions, but they say, well, I don't want that because I think it's better for the economy. I think that one day I want to have the opportunity to become a wealthy person. That's like saying, well, if I go out there, keep playing basketball, I think I'll make it to the NBA. It ain't going to happen,
It ain't
pal.
gonna happen, yeah. And I want to have the opportunity to buy a $248 million penthouse in New York City, Chris.
I've heard someone arguing that it's good that these wealthy people can buy the $100 million yacht because it trickles down to all the engineers and constructors. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. Why don't we just have the military do that and buy all these expensive boats? And I think I just invented the military-industrial complex.
I've been waiting to get trickled on since Ronald Reagan brought that out in the 80s, and it hadn't happened yet.
But yeah, David Stockman's
laughing.
back
That's
out
funny.
there talking about it.
All right, last thing on this, because we got to move on, but with Ocasio-Cortez and especially Elizabeth Warren running for president, bringing these out, Elizabeth Warren's going to force the rest of the presidential candidates in the Democratic side to adopt a plan like this, isn't she?
And it's great news, because that's one of the things they should be talking about. It's a huge problem in the United States. It has been for a long time, and maybe we're going to finally get serious about it.
I don't know how the rest of them get through the Democratic primary without doing something like this,
Democrats there's a lot of lanes, and there might be some options for more moderate views. I mean, most voters are still older, and most voters are less left than that. So we'll see what happens. But the big accomplishment this does is it pulls Democrats back into thinking with their ideals. Because too many Democrats, they're trying to get the technically correct answer. Well, if I do the math right and I do all the studies and fact check it, I'll find the right way for everything to be well. And people don't want that. People don't like being technically correct. People want to hear a story where they're the good guys and the bad guys lose.
And that's exactly right. And more importantly, they aren't going to get Trump voters to come and vote for them by talking about those things.
Well,
So I think the winning candidate will be the one, Evan's right, that'll just come out and say, build a bank instead of a wall. And that'll be the tagline. And we're just going to put all this money in it for you.
But I just want to know, do millionaires wear sweaters like that?
Yeah, a lot of cardigan.
That's
a lot of cardigan.
That's his high school Letterman sweater. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee stepped down as
Well, if you knew anything about fashion, I would take that as an insult.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee stepped down last week as chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and at the same time temporarily stepped down from the chairmanship of the House Judiciary Subcommittee, facing fallout from a lawsuit that claims she fired an aide who was sexually assaulted by a supervisor at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. A bad week for Sheila.
She was also disqualified from the marathon.
I didn't know that.
She ran the half marathon, and if you take more than 4 hours, they disqualify you. And she took about 5 hours. But I'll give it to her. How old is she? 70 something.
I don't know.
Going
I didn't even.
13.1 miles takes a while.
I didn't even try to run.
Yeah.
Now talk about piling on. She's had the worst week that she's had in
And Evan
20
brings
years.
that up.
And Evan brings up the half marathon. I mean, really. But anyway, look, members of Congress, especially those that have been there a while, need to recognize that it's a new day and age. And I think, read about how some of these things have been handled in the past. They thought they could sweep everything under the carpet, and they did a pretty damn good job of it. But that's not going to happen anymore. And for something like this to have been brought to the attention of the congressional office and to be handled in such a dismal fashion, I think she's done the right thing by stepping down. We'll see where the investigation leads, but this is
Were you in Congress with her, Chris?
Yeah, of course.
What was it like working with her?
No, I'm not going to go into that.
I think you might be undermining your own point.
No.
Well, I can tell you this. I've worked with Sheila Jackson Lee on several issues here in Houston on matters that I've been working on from a legal standpoint. And I can tell you she's one of the hardest working people I've ever worked with. She works hard for her district, and from the side that I've been on, she works very diligently. She
no question about that.
I've never
She's
been.
always had staff issues.
I don't think that.
I've never been in her office.
Everybody knows that she works really hard. Sheila Jackson Lee is basically upholding the legacy that was started years ago by Barbara Jordan. But the fact of the matter is, the reason why this story has risen to the level of a national story, because it was in the New York Times, but we here in Houston know that Sheila would be an HR's department worst nightmare because of all of the staffing issues that Chris referenced. But, it's guilty until proven innocent.
It's innocent until proven guilty is what we usually try to go for.
Yeah, and so Sheila says she's going to fight this, and we'll see what happens. But the Congresswoman has to fight against her own image and her own the things that have happened repeatedly.
But you can't stand up for all the causes that Sheila has, and then have taken this position. And so there are going to need to be some apologies along the way. But you also have to understand what was explained to me when I was in Congress. Obviously, there are not as many African American members of Congress as there are white
and
members. And so as a result of that, the African American members get resumes from really all over the United States. I mean, and it's an incredible honor to go work in one of their offices, and they know that.
Yeah,
and,
but
and
this is part of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation.
She's been in office for 26 years in Congress.
Came back to her staff.
26 years in Congress.
Yeah.
Maybe that's long enough. Maybe we can say she's fought the good fight. She's ran hard, and now it's time to let someone else hold that seat. I think I hear Jolanda Jones off in the distance.
Well, there are a lot of people who have run against Sheila Evans, and you're right, but they really have to stay up 24 hours a day to run against Sheila, because she's going to be at everything at all hours of the night, and it's going to be really difficult to remove.
We got two more topics, and we only got a couple of minutes. Roger Stone's indictment: no conspiracy alleged. It appears to tie Stone to a senior Trump aide, and which ties him to WikiLeaks. Is that enough to tie the campaign to Russia?
Let's start a new game. We do tweet or not a tweet.
Let's
just do guilty or not guilty.
Stop hitting the
Guilty.
table. Stop hitting the table.
It's the indicted. It's the indicted. This is
Indicted.
This
It's a
seems
movie.
like another episode of The Indicted. And I love Robert Mueller because there was an article in GQ that talked about his style. And when they interview people who come in who as witnesses, he basically doesn't ask one question. He sits at the back of the room and just listens to his surrogates ask those questions. It feels like he's a sniper from afar. They never hear him, they never see him, but they're getting picked off. So this is another piece in this huge puzzle that he's painting. And I think that Trump should be worried because it's getting closer to his inner circle.
Right.
Roger Stone's one of those people who's close to him. So I would be worried if I was Jared, if I was Don Jr.
Anyone
But-
who thinks this is over quickly is crazy. This investigation is not
No,
over.
it just keeps on going. But
Right.
also, I may have mentioned this before, but if folks have Netflix, and I hope I don't sound like Wilbur Ross, but anyway, if folks have Netflix, watch Get Me Roger Stone, because it's an incredible documentary. And all during the Trump campaign, they always tried to talk about Roger Stone like he was sort of an outlier, like he was just this crazy guy that nobody really knew all that well. He was partners with Paul Manafort and Charlie
Right.
Black. Charlie Black, the institutional guy the Republican Party's been throwing up for years to comment on presidential races. So they had this extraordinarily powerful partnership in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, Roger Stone's an absolute freaktoid.
He's got a
And-
tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back.
Well,
Stephanie Miller made a funny comment. She said Nixon never went to jail, but his tattoo might be going.
and if you don't need if you need any more proof, he makes worse fashion choices than I do. So there
you got anything on this?
I've got nothing. This is all just very depressing to me.
All right.
I cannot relish in the horrors that are befalling our country right now.
All right. The
Last
last
join your depression. Evan.
last topic, the postscript on the Catholic high school boys and Native Americans. Turns out the entire event was actually started by a group of black protesters who were hurling insults at everyone, including the Catholic high school boys when they walked up, and the Native Americans. I heard the tape. It was horrible to listen to what the insults they were hurling.
Oh,
The
okay.
media.
So what do you and Chris
hang
need
on,
to
hang
do,
on,
James?
hang on, hang on, hang on. I'm not
What do
through.
you and Chris need to do,
Hang
James?
on. The media, all of them, covered it wrong. Was it the MAGA hats? Was it that caused them to misread the situation? Or was it a rush to judgment by the media? I watched several media outlets that covered it, and my interpretation was based on several media outlets, and I misread the situation. The next day, when I heard the full tape, I corrected it on my Facebook page and corrected what my interpretation was. It didn't change my conclusion, but I had to move the deck chairs around.
Well, look, there are black activists that self-respecting black activists don't go around. These were four guys yelling crazy stuff. Four.
Well, I'm not-
and these kids are wearing those MAGA hats in Washington D.C. It's
doing
like
a tomahawk dance.
it's like wearing a steak suit in a pack of pit bulldogs. You know, to me, it doesn't change my conclusion either, Chris. But I think that, yes, the media may have jumped to a conclusion quicker than they should have, but it still tells me something about these kids that they have the audacity to wear these MAGA hats. Not that they don't, have the right to do that.
They have
when
the
you
absolute
wear
right
these
to wear them.
when they have these MAGA hats, wearing them in D.C. and going before 4 or 5 crazy-ass black activists who other black activists won't even come out there with, then, you get what you pay for.
They weren't doing
But I
anything
hope that-
wrong.
But I do hope the media treats it as a learning moment, because
Right.
the
We
whole
always do.
the whole
We
thing was so
always do.
strange, in that I thought one of the most fascinating things to come out of it was the person who really posted the video that went viral. Obviously, Twitter ended up shutting down the account,
Right.
and obviously
And-
a pro at what
And I just
he
don't
or
think
she
that.
was doing.
And y'all have all worked in the media. I just don't think that they did a full job in investigating it before they went.
I
before they
disagree.
posted it.
I think they did. Well, I don't know who posted it is the thing. When the actual professionals started to look at it is when you got the actual reporting out of it, and they did do a good job. As you report anything, you get the facts as they come to you and you report them out. What happened is that people came to moral judgment before all the
Yeah.
facts were there. But this all
I
reminded
saw
me
it
of,
on the ABC Evening News. I mean,
and they came.
that's where I got it.
Today,
That
I
Sunday.
want to come at this from a
Yeah.
slightly obscure angle. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and when Adolf Hitler invaded the Sudetenland, FDR wrote a letter to him basically being like, what else are you going to invade, pal? Is Poland next? Is France next? What's going on? And Hitler took that letter and gave one of his ridiculous 3-hour speeches making fun of America, saying, oh, America's going to come judge me for invading places? What about all the Sioux territory you invaded? What about all the natives you killed? Oh, America's going to judge me. Yeah, right. And we definitely, as a society, bear this burden of the Holocaust. Today's Holocaust Remembrance Day, we have Holocaust museums, but we never came to moral terms with what happened to natives in America.
Right.
We don't have a lot of museums dedicated to that. We don't talk about the moral stain or anything we've done to make up for it. And we still have native territories in the United States that are supposed to be discrete from the rest of the United States. We don't know about that. We don't talk about that. And I think that's where the core of this this whole spectacle came from,
Right.
is that a guy who was protesting in Washington, D.C., because it was an indigenous people's protest, walked up with a drum and started beating it, and there's the kids in front of them doing the tomahawk chant. Like, well, let's talk about that. Absent this single incident, I think we should be talking about, why were those people there protesting in the first place? What is it that we can do to clean ourselves of this moral stain? Is there something we should be doing? And that's the hard conversation to have, that's not as much fun as going back and forth and being like, well, were these high school kids assholes or not?
Yeah,
Well, and
that's a
then
good
why
point.
did the high school
That's a really
kids
good
sit
point.
there and stare him down? Because despite what his the hired public relations guy told him to say to Savannah on the Today Show, I think it was pretty clear that he was showing off or whatever, doing whatever stupid high school kids do. But
All right, let's move into out of left field. We're almost out of time. I'll go first.
So you
I don't
won't
want you
have
to
the
steal
same
my
thing.
stuff anymore, you son of a bitch. All right, the definition of a wall almost cost 800,000 people everything. The ego of the president and the fight to show the president that Congress has power almost cost those people who do the government's work everything they own. That's more of a cost that anyone should have to pay, especially people that are doing work for us. And I think it's wrong. I think that the President of the United States needs to learn how to be a governor. He needs to learn what governing and governing people is really all about. And it's not about his ego. It's not about President Trump. It's about being a governor of people. And this wall, or the definition of what a wall is more than just you, Mr. President, and what you have done and what you have done to 800,000 people. You need to sit and stop and think about before you wade in 19 days and do this again. That's my out of left field.
Evan?
Oh, impeach.
Is that it?
I love it.
That's all I got. Like, what else do you want to happen? We're just going to keep going at this until the 2020 election. So just impeach already. Just do it.
Hilarious. I love it.
Nothing else is going to happen. He's not going to learn his lesson. He wouldn't have learned it, ever. This is who he is. It's going to keep being like this. Nothing gets better. No amount of shaming. No amount of, well, this is finally the moment where Trump has faced his. No.
And they're
it's over.
expecting it anyway because we have oversight now.
Go ahead.
So I have a series of random thoughts, unlike my other appearances on this show. But what I want to talk about is how the Republicans have been really good at revising history, particularly when it comes to civil rights icons like Martin Luther King and Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. They've done it with Martin Luther King and talking about, people should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, and overturning, or trying to overturn affirmative action. They've done it in Trump's immigration argument about immigration by using a phrase that Barbara Jordan said during this bipartisan commission on immigration. And they basically are trying to use that to say that we should build this wall. Revisionist history is not going to work, Republicans. I think people are onto your game, and so stop twisting the words of these icons to fit your own political ends.
My out of left field has to do with what I guess could best term a sad experience I had recently. A friend of mine has returned after doing a long work stint in Germany. and he was telling me about working over there and how difficult it can be. He's a lawyer, and how difficult it can be to work things out, but finding people in the office and what have you, because of a lot of the governmental policies that they have. And he went on to say that they have this extraordinary maternity leave program that's required, and how it protects your job while you're on maternity leave. They have this extraordinary paternity leave program that also protects your job. They have this, they have that, and going on. And I thought he was saying it as sort of a criticism at first, and then he said, but they're the happiest people I think I've ever been around. And we can talk as much shit as we want, and we can keep saying that we're the greatest country on the face of the earth, and I've always believed that, and I want to continue to believe that. But with the leadership that we've presently got, we're not going to be able to continue to say that. And at some point, you really do have to look at what's going on in other parts of the world and be willing to admit they're not getting it all wrong. So that's my out of left field for this week.
All right, well, that's all the time we have this week. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please rate us on iTunes. More important than that, what do we need you to what? Do what, Evan?
Subscribe.
That's all about subscriptions. Go to Libsyn or your favorite podcasting site and subscribe to What's Left America. Much thanks to Vertical Ascension Entertainment and Keegan DeLeo, our in-studio producer. We'll see you next week. Good job.
Oh, thank you.